Okay, next up we have Sue Doyle, who's Director of RFID Applications at OAT, a division of Checkpoint, and Michael Liard, who is an industry analyst at Liard Research and Consulting. They're going to be talking about how you do the math and make IoT work for business. Sue, I've given you control of the keyboard. Is that okay, or does Mike need control?
I think we're fine. Thank you. We can be co-pilots. So thank you. Thank you for joining us and hanging in there. Terrific stories across the spectrum with different industries, from manufacturing to education. We're seeing a lot of IoT use cases in retail. I know, Mark, you just published one on SpiceJet and airlines and luggage. So I'm lucky to be joined by Mike Liard today. He is the chair of IoT for AIM. Previously with VDC Research and ABI Research. He's also a very familiar face to those of you who attend RFID Journal and IoT Journal. So a quick intro on us, and this is a very busy slide, which is probably why I just went back, on who we are. So we started out as OAT Systems. We were acquired by Checkpoint Systems, and now we are part of CCL Industries in Canada. So we basically started out in the RFID space as the first middleware platform back in 2001 for early initiatives for RFID. And as we built the platform, it was to be device agnostic and sensor agnostic. And that really plays into what we're doing with the IoT today, because understanding how to connect to multiple devices, how to ensure data quality, and how to process large volumes of data is becoming increasingly important. And now we also have the backing of CCL Industries, who is a packaging leader. And as we see in consumer-facing applications, RFID is increasingly being embedded into consumer goods as well as industrial applications. So that's going to add to a lot of the momentum in the industry. So, sir. What Mike and I will be talking about today is trying to cut through some of the misconceptions around IoT. I think the word IoT is cool. It's exciting. Certainly, Matt is making it very cool at OU. But I think for business users, it's what's the starting point. And I think there's a lot of confusion in terms of how to get started and how to approach this, and how to justify it to management. So we're going to do a little update on sensors, definitions, understanding the IoT ecosystem, talking about some of those misconceptions, and really focus on how do we align IoT with corporate initiatives and put together some next steps for IoT processes in the real world.
So yeah, just talking about providing a quick sensor update and what to consider when looking at the IoT and what's contributing to the IoT story. And for me, I think we should consider the big three of IoT in terms of enabling technologies and solutions, and let's think about them as main characters in the auto ID sensor and mobility IoT story. And you see some of the thoughts listed here, but as I think about those big three in IoT, the first for me is mobile devices, solutions, and platforms, and the wireless communication that's involved there. The second main character or second part of the big three is auto ID technologies, whether it's data carriers, digital inputs, and sensor technology and solutions. And that could include barcode, RFID, NFC, contactless technology, real-time location systems, location-based systems, and a multitude of various different sensor types. And the third is M2M communication and technologies. And when we talk about M2M or machine-to-machine communication technologies, a lot of folks discuss that when it comes to having a conversation around IoT. And unfortunately, a lot of individuals interchange those terms, and they're not. M2M, like auto ID and like sensor technologies, are enabling forces or enabling technologies as part of the broader IoT picture. But those are the big three groups of IoT character actors, if you will. And if you look at these characters, there's some common traits that begin to emerge among these sensor actors and characters within this IoT story. And The first trait is they're all data-driven. It's big data, small data, dark data, whatever type of data you want to call it. Everything is data-driven. Second, there's a real strong analytical focus. The analytics are involved with capturing that data and then analyzing it and then using that in an effective way is one of the common traits that you're seeing within the IoT story as well. The third is a level of automation. It's automated technology here. It's data capture via wired or wireless methods. And then the fourth is, these are agile technologies and solutions that invite or encourage A, flexibility in system design, B, technology coexistence or hybridized approaches to IoT in terms of the types of sensors that can be leveraged or are being leveraged today, and C, higher levels of automation in general. I think that's, it's these four traits that weave together that become the character traits of those main actors that we talked about as part of the IoT story. Next slide, Sue.
So a lot of this is how do we understand the IoT ecosystem. When we think about IoT, a lot of the misconceptions come around the sensors. That people get stuck on the sensors. It's about Fitbits, beacons, M2M. But it really needs to be about the opportunity and thinking about how this all contributes to the opportunity. So the first thing IoT is data. What data can I have now that I didn't have before? And if we look at the ROI of some of this data, sometimes we don't know what we don't know until we know it. I know that sounds like a circular argument, but in many of the companies we work with, they're finding out more from sensors that they didn't know before. They didn't know they could have this kind of data. A perfect example in retail is retailers now understanding as much on the brick and mortar level what's happening in their stores as they understood online. So they're seeing IoT as very much a weapon against Amazon. But the data has to be interwoven. It has to be balanced. There's independence between the data, and that comes from connections and access to information. So those connections are flexible as well. It may be private data combined with public data, that's publicly available, data that's currently in the cloud, available through governments, so that if we think about stock market applications, for instance, there are individual finance applications that utilize publicly available information from companies to the stock market in order to enrich those applications. Partnerships and collaboration, again, it can be public, private, it can be multiple companies, it can be through a value chain, all the value chain partners sharing information in order to track merchandise, to track inventory across a wide swath of geography. And IoT is about processes and applications. How do we actually make that work to handle exception handling? How do we automate processes? George was talking about that in the manufacturing space. How do we automate things that were manual before and open up the world of opportunity? So again, as these connections start to build and we start to think about the parts of the ecosystem, the data is going to be even more valuable. We'll learn more and we'll continuously improve.
So just to quickly piggyback on your thoughts here, which I think are very, very important. When it comes to IoT, data and sensors will not and should not exist in a silo. I think that's the key point here. It's this interwoven nature that is involved here. And the reality really is a combination of sensors and technologies and a combination of data coming from those input devices and data carriers will be used to turn what I consider fragmented agility that exists today, where agility may be found in separate business processes, let's say, but that the information is not really linked. And once we kind of weave this information together, you can really begin to create, a desired goal among many enterprises, retailers, and organizations, and that's becoming a fully connected, agile enterprise. So I think, as we understand the IoT ecosystem and take an appreciation for some of the things that you just said, I think, realizing that you can become a fully connected, agile enterprise, organization, retailer, et cetera, is going to be key moving forward as we continue to talk about IoT.
Great. To make this a little more tangible, we're from the Boston area, and this is just an example that you may be experiencing in your own lives as well, that increasingly, so for instance, in the Boston area, there are more traffic sensors that have popped up on the highways. And the traffic sensors are going to be used for automatic tolling to improve traffic flow, but they're also being used for real-time traffic updates. So this is public data, but it's data that is from private vehicles, but it's aggregated to say this is how many cars are moving in a certain direction at this time of day, to be able to estimate how long it will take to get from point A to point B. So this is a way that the IoT is affecting us now, but it opens up the idea for different opportunities between public and private data moving forward. So let's go over some common misconceptions about the IoT. And I'm going to be the bad cop, and I think Mike will be the good cop with the good news. But I think one of the big misconceptions is there are a lot of players now in the IoT space. It is something that certainly makes most enterprise platforms look glamorous. And so what it looks like is that you have to be a big enterprise, and you need a huge enterprise solution in order to participate. And I think Matt at OU is proving that's really not the case. That you need to build a huge infrastructure to benefit, that you can't do anything until you build all these hooks in your system, which again feels onerous when we have objectives to meet. IoT is only for the IT department. That's the third misconception. You have to be a geek to make this work, and you have to work with IT in order to make this happen. The fourth misconception is it's hard to quantify the value of the data and be able to put real ROI numbers behind it. And then it's also hard to figure out a consistent path forward, and how do you take the first step to make this happen?
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize some of the misconceptions, Sue. And as we look at the reality that's out there today, just going against that first point there, IoT, can level the playing field. And the way I look at it is, think big, start small. Pick a process, pick a pain point. We see advertisements out there, targeted towards the enterprise community saying, the Internet of everything. And while that's a great vision to have, maybe, it could take a little bit less onerous kind of attitude towards it and say the Internet of anything. So seek your opportunities, because you can create your own story around IoT and around certain applications or business processes. So then you got to leverage existing tools and processes and infrastructure that's in place. When it comes to IoT and where to start, sometimes as they say, the call is coming from inside the house. You got to leverage technology and infrastructure that you have on hand. So reevaluate, rethink, and reconsider before you start to reinvent, revamp, and perhaps even recoil at the thought of having to develop an IoT strategy. It's not as daunting a task as you may originally have thought. And the cross-functional benefits, this is a very important point. That is the reality here. Think about the data and think about the sensors a bit differently and maximize the value of the data and embrace the interconnectedness that IoT can invite along the way. For me, the IoT opportunity is clear when it comes particularly to data. It is the attention to and treatment of the data that's going to determine overall success within IoT, and I think that's what's going to yield cross-functional benefits. It is hard to quantify the value of the data. The last speaker was talking about, answered a direct question around return on investment. And, the information that's being captured can inform many corporate KPIs. But, as you look at questions or to try to answer questions around return on investment scenarios or total cost of ownership for IoT, I take a bit of a tongue-in-cheek attitude towards it. And ROI around IoT can in some cases mean rarely obvious information. And, when people say to me, oh, what's the TCO around IoT, I just turn it on its head and say, take control, optimize. That's what TCO should really mean when it comes to IoT. And, there are a lot of new examples that we just heard about at the university and other use cases that are out there. Sue's example around toll collection and real-time traffic updates. Create a narrative. What's your IoT story? And I think if you just begin to think about IoT and approaches to IoT and developing a strategy from that aspect and creating a narrative and what you'd like your IoT story to be, I think that's the reality we need to be facing today.
Yeah, and I think when creating the story, it may not always be obvious. So I'm using an example here. This is actually from Kohl's, one of our customers, that was presented by their CEO at WWD, Women's Wear Daily, CEO Summit last fall. This is basically their greatness agenda. These are the 5 pillars that they are using to move forward. And there's no technology listed here. There's no RFID. There's no IoT. But it is a big part of their strategy. It's aligned with these basic pillars. So amazing products, easy experience, personalized connections, incredible savings, winning teams. If you look at your own corporate KPIs, what are the big objectives that your CEO talks about? There's technology is probably not part of that message, but it informs and it enables those objectives. So for an example, amazing products, if we think about how IoT can feed into that, it's inventory tracking, it's shopper analytics, it's supplier data sharing. The faster you can find out whether a product is selling or not and what trend lines look like, the more amazing your products can be, and that's part of the IoT. Easy experience. Can you do a better job of omni-channel fulfillment? If you start to enable shoppers with mobile apps to access inventory and to get promotions, you'd better have your act together, and that's one of the things that sensors can provide. Providing adaptive promotions and loyalty programs in store, that's becoming a big hook for brick and mortar retail. That's something that the IoT can enable. And then finally, under winning teams, adaptive digital tools for sales associates, empowering the sales associate to create a better experience in store is something that's going to help brick and mortar win against purely online retail. So where can IoT make a difference today? It's funny, about 6 weeks ago I did a tour of a large DC from a retailer in the Midwest. It was over 1 million square feet. It was full of shiny, beautiful equipment and conveyors. Light was bouncing off at every angle. Everyone was there going, wow. It was a tour of for supply chain leaders to walk through and understand how this DC operated. And through all the gleaming conveyor belts and fancy sorters, I had a conversation with a couple of supply chain leaders who said, you know what, I can't afford this. I can't afford the capital investment to make this happen. In fact, I need to have more DCs and more nodes out there. I can't just invest in one. But what I need to do is make my current DCs smarter. So the way we look at this is if you have a current process, current facilities, systems, processes, and make them smarter, you can start getting some of the gains that you would have with a large capital investment because you're making what you have smarter. We actually have, I think there was an example at a recent IoT event with GE. They placed sensors on equipment with a 100-year-old factory that had 100-year-old equipment. But the sensors were able to sense vibration and throughput and were able to make that plant work better. So how can you take what you have and make it work better? That's one of the huge opportunities of the IoT. So an example, and I'll walk through this quickly because I know we're short on time, is, for instance, DC, you can make a DC smarter with IoT by verifying shipments as they come in, by tracking time, temperature, perishability of items as they're in inventory, by testing throughput, testing vibration, choke points in the system with IoT sensors, by automating pick, pack, and rework. The most manual parts of any DC can be made better through this sort of ecosystem. And the same thing with outbound shipments, being able to verify outbound shipments and save on freight, make goods, and rework by making that happen. So there are many points within an operation, and supply chain applies to almost everybody, that you can make processes and facilities and systems better with IoT. So there's a formula here where you're looking at sensors plus data pathways, how do you set those up, combined with enterprise systems and processes to create an IoT app. And here's an example for a shipment tracking app that may be used in a DC and also in transit, where you're taking at the top a truck-mounted sensor and a fleet management system, as well as a doctor sensor for inbound deliveries, and an ERP system to track shipments as they arrive in your facility and then as they're in transit. And again, it's a combination of things. It doesn't have to be that complicated. And you can add more as you go. And I know this looks very complex, but if we think about the ecosystem, you could take that shipping app and you could add data streams from trading partners. So you had full chain of custody tracking, and if you're going across international boundaries, customs documentation. You could add new sensor data points in additional facilities, in additional steps of the pick-pack process. And you can also build new applications that are adjacent to that shipping application, like inventory management. So it's really a starting point. This isn't an all or nothing, but find a specific area where you're challenged, and you can build upon that. But most importantly, the ecosystem needs to be flexible and fluid, and that's why I challenge my graphic designer to draw curvy lines instead of straight ones. It's the fluidity of being able to seize those opportunities as they come up. GS1 is doing a lot with data sharing these days, sharing not just shipment information, but information about specific inventory and specific merchandise to provide better traceability. As new data streams become available, as new sensors become available, we can take advantage of that.
As we look to, give some guidance around how to plan for the future, we put some thoughts on this slide here. If we look at these thoughts that are listed and try and summarize them into three, kind of points or takeaways for those joining us today, just take an appreciation that there's no absolute universal definition for IoT that exists today. And secondly, attitudes and approaches to IoT are highly divergent. So to think about IoT or how to approach IoT or plan for the future, think, what does IoT mean to your company, your organization? What does it mean to your offerings, your products, your solutions? What does it mean to your partners? What does it mean to your customers? And thirdly, align your vision of IoT and your IoT strategy with your audience, whether it be an internal or an external audience. So, think about the important components around IoT as you plan for the future, and think about the data connections and pathways and processes, and again, start with what you may have on hand before thinking about adding new sensors or data input technologies out there. Look at what you have on hand and perhaps start with that viewpoint around planning for the future. Next slide. So how do we bring it all together? And when I was talking with Sue, these are the 5 steps or kind of words that came to my mind around IoT. And these 5 steps or phrases are meant for you to use as guidance to help you create an IoT narrative. So consider these factors as you write perhaps the greatest IoT story ever told, or for solution providers out there, the greatest IoT story ever sold. I mean, you've got to conceptualize the vision. You've got to construct, what that may look like. You've got to configure your technologies and your systems and your solutions and your processes. Think about optimization through the entire way. If you think about my tongue-in-cheek comment about total cost of ownership being take control and optimizing the technology on hand and the data being captured is critical. And always think about expansion and how you can take a small IoT deployment or solution or a singular app and turn that into something broader, wider, and larger tomorrow. And think about the connections internally as part of your ecosystem and your business processes that you can weave together using that data to continually expand those connections and bring them to other areas, whether it be additional IoT apps or business processes to drive the value out of a IoT deployment or strategy. And I think, Sue, closing thoughts from you, if not Q&A.
Yeah, I think this has been a short session, but again, we're going to expand more upon this and provide a deployment planner to registrants of this event. And again, there's a lot to talk about, a lot of different opportunities out there, and a lot of examples across multiple industries. So if you start embarking on this IoT journey, you're not the first, but you are in a position where you can really seek the opportunity and turn this into something that helps you meet your business objectives in a new way.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike and Sue. We have time for a couple of questions. Do you have any examples of how IoT is being used in different industries, such as utilities or mining?
Yeah, actually, we're going to be providing a whole list of different examples globally as part of the deployment guide, but certainly for utilities, there are quite a few IoT examples that are interesting around smart metering and around being able to manage the grid in a different way. So look forward to sharing that with this team.
Okay, thanks, Sue. What software or hardware do I need to get started?
Well, I think you don't have to start big. You can start small as long as you start with something that you can expand, that you're not looking at a point app. So again, anything that you can look at that's a platform that can help you encapsulate data from sensors, collect it in a way to ensure data quality and consistency, and then be able to scale to manage large volumes of data. Because I think, as most people on this event know, sensors can generate tremendously large volumes of data, and you want to make sure that you plan to manage those large volumes and make sense of the data that you are collecting.
Okay. Last questions. Any ideas on coming up with an internal IoT strategy for my company?
Do you want to take that one, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from my perspective, just to piggyback on something Sue just said around, start, think big, but you can kind of start small. As you go to develop a strategy, I think you need to look at, from the hardware, software perspective, the data carrier perspective, what are we trying to achieve here, or what, process are we trying to improve or enhance, and take a step back and think about, okay, are we looking for basic identification data here? Are we looking at ID plus location and position information? Are we looking at true sensors where we need ID and maybe condition or status monitoring scenarios? So what type of data are you trying to capture, and what type of data is going to be critical to begin to create your IoT story or your IoT strategy? And for me, it is all about the data. We know that cloud-based solutions are going to be critical to fulfilling the promise of IoT, and IoT strategic conversations, need to include that conversation around data and data management. How is it going to be stored? What type of data? ID, location, condition. How do we effectively leverage that data by turning it into action and meaningful information? So think about the different types of data and how to treat it, and I think that will help drive some decisions around which hardware to use, which software is going to be critical, and ultimately what your IoT solution or deployment is going to look like at the end of the day.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. Sue, thank you, and thank you for your support for the event.
You're welcome.
Okay, just a reminder, folks, that we will be sending you an email probably tomorrow with links to the PDF and the sessions that we are allowed to share, the recordings. You can also go to our library, our video library, and view past and current virtual events at rfid-journal.com/virtual-event/videos. And you need to be a registered user, so that's free. Just set up an account. It doesn't cost you anything. I also want to remind you that we have some upcoming face-to-face events. RFID and Retail Apparel will be held in New York City, October 6th, 2016. That's for qualified retailers only. It's no charge if you're a retailer, but it is a invitation-only event for retailers. We have RFID in Aerospace and Defense, and that will be held October 20th in Long Beach, California at the Long Beach Convention Center. We also have an RFID Institute certification training course on the 19th. If you use the code RJVE, you will get a 10% discount. RFID Journal Live Europe, our 12th annual event in Europe, will be held on the 10th of November in London at the Queen Elizabeth II Conference Center. The 9th, we will also have a certification training course, and you can use the code RJVE again to get a 10% discount. Finally, I'd like to mention that RFID Journal Live US, our big event, flagship event, will be May 9th through 11th next year in Phoenix, Arizona, so save the date. And finally, I want to thank our sponsors. Our platinum sponsor is OmniID, our gold sponsor, HID Global, our deployment guide sponsor, OAT Systems, a division of Checkpoint. And I want to thank all of our presenters. I thought they did a wonderful job today. And most of all, I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you join us. Okay, I'm not sure what that is, but we hope you join us for future virtual events and face-to-face events. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. This concludes our virtual event for today.